Hello and welcome back to my shop. Today's video is going to be focused on sanding and finishing the tabletop. So far I've cleaned off the sides of the table. I've taken all the bark off. I've also sanded it to 220 grit, so it's already looking pretty nice.
Whoa, nice.
Frame pattern is absolutely beautiful. On the underside, I've finished it with a simple coat of polyurethane and I left it rough because I don't need to sand that. I don't want to lose any of the thickness. If you look closely here, you can see that there's still some machining marks that after talking to Vanina, we decided to leave them because it adds a little character. If I wanted to take it off, that would make the slab thinner. Right now it's about, I would say, 1 3/4 inches thick. So I want to keep as much of that mass as possible. Here we've got the various types of sandpaper that I'm going to be using. Okay, it's different, what's called grits. All right. So this is 40 grit. This is meant for taking mass off of it. It's very aggressive sandpaper. If you look at it, you can see that there's little abrasive pieces there. As we go to 80 grit, it's still aggressive, but less so. 120 grit, you're starting to polish it. 220 grit, definitely polishing. 320, 400, 600. That's as high as I'm gonna go. There's a pad that goes with these two mesh. Nobody really carries 400 or 600 grit for the orbital sanders. This is an orbital sander, all right? What this does is it doesn't move just in a circle, but it also changes the axis so it doesn't create a circular pattern when you're sanding. So the reason I'm doing a tutorial on how to sand is most people don't actually understand what it means to sand something. When you're sanding, the first object of sanding is to get rid of any mass that you need to get rid of to create an even level surface. Okay? And the reason that's important is because when light catches an object after you put a finish on it, it's going to create shade, shadow, glare, and any types of divots that you see are going to get picked up by the light. So the first order of business when you're using something like 40 grit, which is extremely aggressive, is to take off mass. Instead of trying to, most people when they use a sander, they're gonna turn it and use it like this to try and get out the marks that are in the wood. What you actually want to do is bring the level down slowly to create an even surface. The point of doing this is to get rid of any machining marks that you have on the surface. So step one is getting rid of mass. Step two is getting rid of machining marks. Any saws, any jointers, planers, anything you use on the surface is going to show up in marks. The obvious ones you get rid of with the 40 grit, but as you go consecutively to the next grit, what you're doing is you're actually getting rid of the machining marks from the previous grit. So when I use the 40 grit to take off mass, it's going to leave a lot of scratch marks. The 80 grit is going to take off those scratch marks, but leave less obvious scratch marks, and so on and so forth down the line. So the idea is by the time you get to something like 600, you really don't see any types of machining marks at all. And it's gonna have a different type of luster when you put a finish on it. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna show you how to sand properly using the 320 grit. Like I said, we've already done 220 grit. When I sand, the biggest keys for me is to keep this flat to the surface, not put a lot of pressure on the machine because you want the machine to work for you. And it's going to work best when it's spinning at the highest revolution. The more pressure you put on it, the slower it's going to be, and it's also going to create little marks or divots in the wood. So when I'm doing the sanding, I'm doing it extremely light. I'm barely putting any pressure at all on the sander. I'm gonna have it hooked up to my vacuum, so I'm gonna be guiding it with 2 arms as I move along. like this. And the idea is to get extremely continuous in your motion and not try to get any little jerky movements, because that's going to take away from the idea of sanding. Like I said before, you really have to be diligent when you do sanding if you want to get a beautiful finish. A lot of people get very impatient at this point, especially because the wood looks ready and it feels ready, and you just want to put the finish on and you want to get the project done. Don't make that mistake. You've done all the work so far. Now take your time to put a beautiful finish. So this is the wood grain after 320. I'm about to go to 400. You can see that there's still tiny little scratches in there. And we're going to keep going.